Welcome to the Perinatal Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Christine, your host and certified perinatal mental health professional. This podcast is all about authentic conversations. We want to open up the discussions around perinatal health and well-being, from mood and anxiety disorders to breastfeeding to grief and loss in the perinatal period, and everything in between. While this is not therapy or medical advice, it is the place where we are going to continue to open up the discussion around all things perinatal mental, physical, emotional, and sexual health to help reduce stigma and break down these barriers to support. I'm so excited because on today's podcast, we have Amanda Gurman from Honest as a Mother podcast, and she's here to talk about postpartum rage, anger, ADHD, that transitioning to motherhood, which is a lot harder than we talk about, and all the things in between. So welcome, Amanda. I'm so happy you're here.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So give us a little bit of background of just kind of your transition into motherhood and kind of, we can start from there and tell us what it was like.
Sure. So I had my first child in 2016. I like to paint the picture. I was like the first one in my friend group to have a baby. I was the first, one to give my parents grandchildren. So I feel like sometimes there's like this added pressure, or maybe just because I don't have anybody else to turn to. That is like, in my age group, of course. So there was that. So my pregnancy was great. I had a really easy pregnancy. I had some health complications at the end, but like a little bed rest, Law and Order SVU, and a whole lot of nacho eating. Like it really wasn't all that for me.
Right.
If I'm being completely transparent.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah. Bed rest can suck, but I got to do it at home at least.
Yes. At least that's good with SVU and nachos.
Yeah. You know what? It was like the weirdest thing. You have really high blood pressure, so maybe you should watch your diet. So I decided I was going to eat nachos every day. Like that was a good idea. Looking back at it, probably not. And then Law and Order SVU. So I'm like watching all of these like children being stolen and things while I'm like ready for my baby to come. It was like a really weird time, actually.
I'm actually really glad you mentioned that because we used to watch Law and Order SVU like religiously. And then I had my first, I was like, oh, I can't watch this anymore. Like, and so we stopped watching it, but part of me does miss it.
I know there's, you know what? We're sick individuals. It's fine. It's fine. I've accepted it. So, so my pregnancy was great. I had a scheduled C-section with my first and second, actually. So my son was breech, and at, I think it was 36 weeks, he was weighing at 8 pounds. So they were like, there is no room left for him. So there's almost no chance we will be able to turn him. So they kind of gave me the choice of like, this is what it's going to be like to turn him, which my understanding would be nearly impossible just because of the size of him, and quite painful from what I understand from other moms who have talked about it. Or I could have a planned cesarean. So I went that route because that just felt like God only knows how big this baby's going to get in the next 4 weeks. He came out 10-3. So thank you, Lord, for the C-section. And quite frankly, I was so grateful that I had the opportunity to pick which one I wanted to do, because I feel like for my first baby, I might have had a C-section anyway. Like that's a big baby. I don't know if I would have been able to get him out.
Right. And it's so interesting because I'm on the other side of that, because my first was 9-6 and then my second was 10-4.
Whoa.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, like what our bodies can and can't handle, right? So I'm making an assumption, but yeah, that's kind of where my head went, was like, oh, I'd probably need one anyways. So I had my planned C-section. That was terrifying. But I've never experienced labor pain, so I don't know. But I have this theory that at least if you've got some labor pain, like maybe you're like in so much pain that it may take over of the fear of the cesarean. Whereas I like walked into the hospital, was scheduled to have a baby at 2:30, had a baby by 2:35,
Right.
walked out the hospital with them. Like it's so crazy to be like, I'm having a baby on this day at this time, and like that actually happened.
Happens. Yes. Yeah. Do you feel like that was helpful for you?
For me, yes. I'm totally like I run anxious. So for me, to have that opportunity, I think was very fitting for me for sure. So when my son was born, he was born with like low sugar levels because he was so big. I'm sure you might have experienced something similar. So a ton of feet pricking and having to feed him. He wasn't latching. My milk didn't come in right away because of the C-section. So a lot of supplementing. And so that was just a lot. Like my first like few hours into motherhood was like a lot. Like this nurse coming in every 2 hours. So, then within that 2 hours, you had to feed him. So I was kind of getting like 1 hour increments at a time. But also Connor cried non-stop because the poor guy was starving. They needed to check his level, so they only wanted me to like feed him a certain amount, and he was constantly being taken from me, and his poor little fat feet were being pricked, and like it was really stressful for him, for me, for my husband. So that was a little bit of a stressful situation. And then when I got home, that just kind of continued. And the biggest thing for me when I came home with my son, and this has kind of been something that I'm trying to change the narrative in motherhood, is I felt instantly like I had taken a back seat. So I had felt very like everybody thought they were entitled to come over to see my baby. I didn't like that, but I also didn't know how to say like, no, I need to sleep, or you can come over, but here's like my boundary of like how long you can stay. Because
Right.
some people stay for hours. Like, go away. I
Please.
need I need to sleep. I need to eat. I need to pump. I need to like do all
Yeah.
these things. So that was hard. But then even just this whole narrative of like, it was okay that I wasn't sleeping at all. It was okay that I wasn't really resting during the day when I just had my abdomen cut open and a child taken out of me. But then also when I was feeling very overwhelmed to rest, there was this huge sense of guilt because I was feeling very like, well, this is what moms do, right? Like there's this narrative that thousands of women give birth every day. They've done it in the field, they've done it unmedicated, all of the things. And so because I was having a hard time healing and resting, and I just felt so like blah in my body and that I wasn't getting the nutrition and rest that I needed, I felt like I was failing, like I was doing something wrong. That just kind of carried on through my entire first few months of motherhood. And when Connor got older, he went through this period. I'm sure so many listeners and yourself can relate when I don't know, I can't remember just how old he was. I think he was like maybe 5 or 6 months or something. And he went through this period where he would have this like witching hour of these like four. I'll never forget. It was 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. He would scream for that long, always. And then I would be able to give him a bottle around midnight. And then he would, because you're like on this like feeding time schedule. And he would go to sleep after that. And so I would rock him, nothing would work unless I was rocking him constantly. And I hated it because at that time he was like 20 pounds almost. Because remember, he was 10 pounds to start. So I'm like rocking this super heavy baby that will not stop screaming unless I'm rocking him. If I put him down, I was like, oh my God, he will not like, he won't let me put him down.
Yeah.
So I was feeling really guilty about like hating that and not wanting to do that. And every other mother, my mom, other people's moms were like, oh, that's what we do. You just rock your baby to sleep every night and you just love it. And it's so beautiful. And I'm thinking, this is this is terrible. Actually, I hate this. This is not good. I am not having a good time. But also internalizing all of what they're saying. And my own thoughts are now like, I must be a terrible mom because I don't want to do those things.
And I think, sorry, I'm going to jump for a second. I think that, obviously everyone's different, but then that narrative comes in, like you said, right? Like kind of the guilt around that of, well, I'm not like every other mom, right? And I think it's so, so important, to separate the love we have for our kids and the work of parenting, and maybe the lack of love that we have for the work of parenting. I can still love my baby, but hate that, I have to rock him to sleep for 4 hours, or, that he's screaming for 4 hours. Like, who can love that? Like, that is so, so, so hard, right?
And looking back now, it's as simple as that. But when you're in the thick of it, it feels like I must be doing something wrong. And so my biggest like aha moment when I first became a mom was I had this conversation with my stepmom, who is very different from my mom and many other moms. And she, to me, I always kind of thought she was like a little bit like rougher, a little bit harder, like not like a soft mom that I was like trying to portray or something like this. Like, I don't really know how to put it into words, but she was just different. And so I brought this up to her, and she said to me, okay, so you don't want to rock him, so don't. And I was like, what do you mean don't? Like, what do you mean? And she was like, you don't have to. And so a little while longer went on, and I thought about what she talked about. And so I did do sleep training.
Yeah.
But that is what worked for Connor. And it was so interesting because she was telling me, okay, let me just, when I was ready, she just said to me, okay, let's do something. Like, let's pick him up and then put him down. And then he would scream. Okay, pick him up. And he'd stop instantly. Or sometimes if I went to his bedside,
Right.
he would stop.
Yeah.
And so she's like, okay, we're gonna do this together. And she like held my hand through it. I think Connor cried for honestly probably in total 5 minutes.
Right.
And he officially slept through the night at like 7 months old or something, 12 hours straight after that.
Wow.
And then I felt like a brand new freaking person.
Right. You are the first person that has told me, outside of a partner, and even so, I haven't heard that. I don't even know if ever, that someone was like, first of all, she was giving you permission, right? You don't want to pick him up? Don't pick him up. Like, she's giving you permission.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was hard. You're like, what?
Yes.
But good moms pick up their babies. Good moms do that. And she was like, I'm a fucking good mom. I don't do that.
Right. Exactly. And so even talking about the sleep training, but she stayed and helped you through it. Mm-hmm. How many people, I'm telling you, that is the first time I've heard that. How many people give us unsolicited advice, right? That we don't ask for. In this case, it sounds like she was really helpful, and you were probably talking about it and all that. But so many people will say like, oh, just do this with your baby, sleep train, don't sleep train, bottle feed, nurse them, do this, do that, right? But they're not there helping us do that with our baby at home.
No.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. I'm very grateful to her. So she taught me a very important lesson, which is kind of my message moving forward. Is like, you don't have to be that cookie cutter mom. And you also don't have to know what you like. I knew what I didn't like. So she came at it from that angle. Okay, so don't do it. So if we don't like this, why are we doing it? And it was honest. It was like a freaking light switch went off. And then I had this like moment, and I was like, okay, well, moving forward, I'm going to do things how I think I should do them and take advice from other people. But if it's not working, I'm going to figure out that I don't like it. It's not working. And I'm going to move to something else. I'm not sticking with something because everybody else is telling me I should do it, or the doctor says I should do it, or the lady down the street, or the stupid books that are not helpful at all. Like, whatever they say, it didn't work for me. And then Like, so that was my first lesson. Like, every child is different. Every child has different needs. Every mom has different needs. And so just being given that permission of like, do what's best for you, for Connor. And let me just tell you that Connor became a completely different child. He was happy. I didn't bring him anywhere because all he did was scream and cry because the poor thing was exhausted, but so was I. So we would just scream and cry together.
Right.
And
Right. Because what else can you do? Right.
yes. And I think like that was the biggest thing for me was like, wow, like look at this. Like everybody is like, oh, sleep training's so bad. You're a terrible mother. How would you let them cry? Blah, 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 whatever. And you're allowed to have your opinion on sleep training. That's fine. But it worked for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's all that I was focusing on. So,
and that's the thing is I tell people all the time is that the books were not written for your baby. Like those books were not written for Connor. Also, my middle child is Connor, just by the way. So
Connor's such a good name.
Such a great name. I love it. The books were not made for Connor. You did some sleep training, right? But it sounds like you did it in a way that seemed to work for you and Connor, right? As opposed to like, I'm going to do it exactly this way because this is how it was written. Again, it wasn't written with Connor in mind, right? The textbooks are not. The charts in the doctor's office, the growth charts, they are not written for your baby. Right? Like I love this talking about changing the narrative, right? Around motherhood. It's so important because you're right. We can talk about this all day, but like when we're in the middle of it, we still have those go-to, thoughts and feelings that have been, really taught to us, socialized into us, right? Good moms are sweet and kind and sacrifice everything for their kids.
They're a martyr.
They're a martyr. Exactly. Martyr as motherhood, right? Motherhood is murder. Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't fit that martyrdom box. And I felt like I was trying to fit so hard into it, but it's just not who I am, which is okay.
Right.
So yeah. And then fast forward to 2018 when I had my daughters, when I really struggled with my mental health, which is also a huge thing. So I was telling you earlier that I spoke at the Toronto Baby Show this weekend, and that was a huge thing that a lot of moms were talking to me about. And I scared them about it, and I felt bad that they were scared, but they didn't know that you don't have to have it with your first to get it with your second.
Yes. Thank you, Amanda, for bringing that up, because anything you've ever read, I'm sure, about mental illness, mental health issues in, the perinatal period, it's not that it's expressly written that it happens with your first, but it's always like the way it's spoken about implies that it's with your first baby. Like, and there's no other kids there, right? My experience was with my third. And I was honestly like mentally, other than my nursing challenges with my first, but like felt pretty good. And it totally sidelined me because I was shocked. I was like, well, it's my third. Like, I'm good now.
I know what I'm doing. Like I know the sleep deprivation, and you learn a lot from your previous experiences, but again, this is a different child.
Yes. And your also experience is different too, physically, emotionally, mentally, right? How, the pregnancy impacts you, how delivery impacts you, all of those things, how your hormones shift and change is different every pregnancy as well.
Yeah. So, and also just for anybody listening, I also did not start experiencing symptoms until 4 months postpartum.
Right.
That's the other thing. Like I didn't really feel the baby blues that I remember. Like there might have been a day or two of it, but I don't remember feeling that baby blue period really until 4 months postpartum when my husband went back to work. And yeah, he took the first 4 months, which was phenomenal. But when, he was working all day and I was up all night by myself with the newborn, not by myself, he was there, but still he was working all day. So, you got to let him sleep at some point. And so he would be with me at night, but then gone all day. And then I would have my toddler at home with me all day. My toddler stopped napping when my daughter was 4 months postpartum,
Oh no.
which would, which just made things like
The worst.
so much harder.
Yeah.
But I found myself really struggling with irritability and anger. So there was not really a red flag for me. I didn't think that I was depressed or anxious because it didn't look like either of those things. So what it did look like is, my toddler being a regular 2.5-year-old whining about the blue cup and me slamming a door because I'm so overwhelmed by him being overwhelmed about the blue cup and not the green cup, and just like yelling and screaming. And then the biggest moment for me was when there was like one night where my daughter woke up at 4 a.m. because she was freaking 4 months old. So of course, logically speaking here, people, 4-month-olds need to eat in the middle of the night. I mean, I'm sure there's a 4-month-old that didn't, but so she did. And I just remember like, even just like waking up, the first moment of like hearing her cry, like would send me into like a massive amount of rage. Like, I am just awake and I am so angry that you need me.
Yeah.
And that was this moment where I was like, that's weird, because Scarlett was also great at like the 4 a.m. feed. It happened for a really long time. She actually needed that like much longer than Connor did, which is probably another reason that I was frustrated with her, because Connor didn't need that, right?
Right.
So I would feed her and then she would always go back to sleep. And it was like super simple. And it was just like a quick, like 30 minutes, give her bottle and she'd go back to sleep, no problem. But there was like this red flag in my brain, like, this feels different. This really shouldn't make me that mad, because yes, of course, does it suck to get up in the middle of the night? Of course, but it's really not an inconvenience. It's my 4-month-old baby. She needs to eat.
Right.
So I kind of started to watch where my anger was coming, and then I noticed how often it was around.
Good for you. Sorry to interrupt you. I think that's a good point, is, really that it sounds like that was different for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a key that I like to share with people, is that if it feels like you feel different, like you're acting different or you're just not yourself, because so many times the symptoms are not necessarily cookie cutter or exactly like the internet says, right? And it can be confusing. I didn't know, I was more on the anxious side. So at that point, I was not a counselor. I was not in mental health. Like, I didn't know. I just thought it was postpartum depression. I didn't know there was like postpartum anxiety and all the other things. So I was like, well, I'm really anxious, so it's not postpartum depression. So I had no clue what was going on, right? So, but that knowing, like, I felt really different. Like, I was not myself. I was not handling stress or the baby, like you said, right? Like I would have, like I did with my other two, right? So just noticing if you feel just really not yourself, that is definitely, like you did, Amanda, that time to kind of just pay attention to how you're feeling and reacting.
Yeah. And another like big red flag for me that I really like to mention, because I feel like this is something that's vulnerable, but I think it's important, is I was having really bad intrusive thoughts.
Yeah. Yes.
And when my son would go to sleep, I would lay in his bed with him and be like so overwhelmed with sadness and be like, why did I do this? Why did I have a second baby? I should have just had one. I'm not good enough to be her mother. She deserves better than me. And then the shame cycle would begin of like, oh my God, what a terrible mother. You regret having your child? Like, what kind of mother are you? And, it's just like it nonstop. And then when I finally decided I was going to tell someone about these intrusive thoughts, I was met with, you don't mean those things. Why would you say something like that?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, I understand now that is just, that's just what a lot of moms are met with.
Yes.
And that's the expectation on motherhood, is you are supposed to love every freaking second of these kids and never talk about your struggles. And this person was older. So I picked the wrong person But then I buried it. I buried it for like 2 more months and struggled with it until my husband brought it up to me.
Yeah.
And said, like, you're really angry. I don't know what's going on with you, which then triggered a bigger shame spiral of like, he's going to leave me. He knows I don't love this, so he's going to leave me and I'm a terrible mother and so on and so forth, which was not the case. I have a very supportive husband who held my hand while I called a therapist and did all of the things. But the biggest eye-opener when I first sat in that therapist's office is that anger is a symptom of both anxiety and depression.
Yes.
And she didn't really care which one of them it was that I had, because I was kind of sealing things from both buckets.
Mm-hmm.
All she knew is that I was struggling with something called postpartum rage, which apparently is quite common.
Yes.
And just having a label on it, understanding where it was coming from, made me feel so much less crazy. And it was like, okay, I'm not a bad mom. I'm just a mom who's having a really hard time and I need help. I need support. I need all of these things. And now I'm going to get that and I'm going to work with this therapist and, go on meds and all the things. And I'm going to be better. I'm going to be like the best version of myself that I can be. And also was a huge moment where I started talking about all of these things because I was like, postpartum rage, what the hell is that?
Right. Again, we don't talk about it, right? We just do not talk about it enough. I think we are, I'm seeing on different podcasts and stuff, like we are starting to talk about it a little bit more, but definitely we need to keep going, keep talking about it because again, I think even speaking to that piece of like, when you told someone about your intrusive thoughts and you were met with like, you don't mean that. Like, first of all, intrusive thoughts, and I will say this every time someone talks about it so that everyone hears the message. We all as human beings have intrusive thoughts because our brains can't I'm not good with numbers, but like well over 60,000 thoughts a day. Like it's probably more than that, but there's no way we can actually control every one of those thoughts of like, what am I going to think now? What am I going to think now? Right. So it's normal. Intrusive thoughts are those unwanted thoughts coming in and they can be very scary. They can be violent. They can be about something bad happening to you or your family or your kids. They can be sexual in nature. They can just be weird, right? Like our thoughts are strange. Right. And so, 100% of new parents have intrusive thoughts because that also comes with anxiety. 100% of parents are going to have a level. I'm not saying clinical anxiety where we need medication, but a heightened level of anxiety because now we are responsible for this little being's health and well-being, right? Mm-hmm. And so, of course, our amygdala in our brain is going to go, be careful. This can be dangerous. This can be dangerous. Watch the stairs. You got a baby proof. Do this, do that, right? That's normal. 50% in a study I read, 50% of parents will have intrusive thoughts about harming their babies intentionally. Mm-hmm. This is not an indication that we will follow through on it and do it. Thoughts do not equal action. And I know it feels really, really scary. We did an episode on intrusive thoughts, so go check that out because I talk about step by step, like what you can do to manage that. It's really just acknowledge the thought and do something to soothe yourself. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to say that. And what's interesting is that is the most listened to episode on my podcast is the episode about intrusive thoughts.
Because they're important and everybody has them. I still have them.
Of course, I have them every day. Yeah. And now I can go, oh, that was weird. Or, oh, that was kind of scary. But, oh, my anxiety is a little higher today or this week. Right.
Yeah. Like even just like for an example, for someone listening, like last week I had one where I was like, chopping up vegetables and then my daughter was coloring and my brain was like, imagine you cut her with this knife. That would be terrible.
Yes.
And I'm like, that was freaking weird. Okay, goodbye.
Right.
But like before when I was struggling, I believed the thoughts I was having, like what a terrible person. Like, but yeah, so they come up all the time. I can remember when I was a kid having them.
Totally.
And once you normalize what they are and you can actually understand what they are and then they don't define you as a person, right? Like I remember the therapist once told me, like, if they don't align with your morals and values as a person, like when I was telling her like the different intrusive thoughts, like say the knife one. Okay, so but if you don't actually want to harm your child with the knife, it's not real. It's just an anxious thought. So you can acknowledge it and then bye-bye.
Yes, exactly. Because that would be terrible. That would be dangerous, right?
But also then still creating a space for women who actually feel like they might want to do that is even bigger. Like I love talking about intrusive thoughts because the reality is that happens, right? And we need to allow women to understand what they are and understand that if it doesn't sit in the whole like, okay, I don't think that I want to do that. If it sits more like, that's a thought I have quite often and I kind of feel like it might, we also need to create a space for them to tell somebody about that and talk about it and understand what that is and, get support for it. Because I feel like it's the whole reason I started the podcast and started telling my story, because I hate that women are so alone and afraid that people are going to judge them or are committing suicide because they can't deal with their own thoughts anymore. Like, this is crazy. They should not be sitting alone with these thoughts because it's not normal. Like you need support, but it's normal. And like, it's a common thing that can happen.
That's right.
It's a symptom. Thank you.
It's a symptom. And when you said about getting that diagnosis, I felt the same, right? Like, oh, this is a thing. And this is not just me being a bad mom, right? Like you were able, there are some people that can be resistant. Like, I don't want the label. And and I get that. I totally get that. For me, I found it very soothing to understand, well, this is the label. This is the box, so to speak, of like the symptoms, what can come with it. Now this makes sense.
Yeah, completely. Well, and even like, I know at the beginning of the episode, we talked a little bit about ADHD. Like I recently was diagnosed with ADHD. So even just for anybody who's listening, like that could have played a huge part into my postpartum range. I don't know because I didn't know what I know now back then, but also I now understand that I have a very difficult time of managing my own emotions. And then now inside my home, I have two little humans with completely dysregulated emotions on the regular day because they are 5 and 7. So I am trying to regulate their emotions when I don't even know how to regulate my own.
Isn't that the cruel joke of being a parent with ADHD?
But here's the thing, is I'm really good at regulating theirs.
Right.
Really good at it. But then when I have them, I'm like, oh my God, everybody get out of the way. I'm going to have an absolute freak out.
Yes.
But nobody else can freak out because I am so good at regulating. But yes, so it is the most exhausting thing to learn how to regulate my own emotions while regulating theirs when I'm not even really sure that I know how to do it yet. But like, we're getting there.
You're getting there. Yeah. You're absolutely right. So we know with ADHD, we have a higher chance of developing a mental illness like anxiety or depression. Also, especially when our symptoms are, first of all, if we're undiagnosed, our symptoms are unmanaged. And usually anxiety is the kind of number one that's co-diagnosed. We call it comorbid condition. I don't like that word.
I don't like that word.
No,
either.
Me neither. But
comorbid sounds morbid.
Morbid. Yeah. I like to say co-occurring, but happens at the same time, basically. Because if you think about if our symptoms are unmanaged, I'm like, of course I was anxious because what was I even doing with my life, right?
Well, this is just the thing. And even within the realm of motherhood, once I understood what was going on with my brain, it helped me understand so much more too, why I burn out so quickly, why I am a mess of a parent 3/4 of the time. I'm not actually, but I think that I am, or why every other mom seems to have a perfectly packed, beautiful lunch at the park, but I also made the lunch, but I forgot it at home. So now you guys are eating like the snacks that I found in the bottom of my purse that I also forgot were there.
Yes, absolutely.
But then also, so that triggers my anxiety because now I'm comparing myself to other mothers and why, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. And, then I'm going to completely dysregulated again.
Absolutely. And if we think about parenting and the amount of executive functioning that parenting takes, of executive functioning is that, comes from the prefrontal cortex in our brain of, being able to regulate our emotions, being able to prioritize tasks, being able to execute tasks, that's a like teeny tiny part. But I feel like parenting is all executive function. Like that's what it is. So if that's
I would agree.
right? If that's impaired for us as it is for me, it's like, I remember my kid transitioning from daycare to school, like JK, and then all the like newsletters and like having to make a lunch and the newsletters and the permission slips. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I can't handle this. Like I was freaking out over like permission slips. Like there was probably like what, 2 in a year, but I don't know, just all the communication from the school. And I couldn't handle it. And I just didn't get it,
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So it adds and adds to this feeling of like, I'm failing, I suck, I'm a terrible mother, I don't know what I'm doing. And like my like sole mission in life is to help new moms, seasoned moms, whoever you are, know that like you're not alone. Either one of the things that I was talking about at the baby show this weekend was like, when you're feeling like you suck and you're doing everything wrong, because you will,
Yeah.
You can listen to the podcast or read my book or just look at my Instagram and either A, I suck with you, or B, we all just don't actually know what we're doing and we're kind of just trying to figure it out. And that is totally okay. Like, I think if your children are happy and healthy, that's the goal, but also for your children to be happy and healthy, they need to have a happy and healthy mom. That's my other big takeaway so far from my motherhood experience is my children cannot come before me.
No.
They have to come after me.
Yep.
And the society builds us up to say, you martyr so hard that you sacrifice everything for your children. And that's what I was doing. And I was just like, a puddle of a human being. And until I started putting myself first before my children, which a lot of people kind of judge me for, my kids are happier.
Right. And I just want to reiterate that for anyone listening, go back and listen to that. Because
happy mom, happy house, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, like you said, and I'm the same. I don't put my kids first. I put me first because no one else is going to do it. And I know people are listening and maybe cringing or they're mad or they're like, forgot this, I'm not listening. That's fine. But I'd love you to keep listening because it's so crucial. And I also love the shift of, and this comes from Olivia Scobie, the Culture of Impossible Parenting, where she talks about moving from baby-centered to family-centered, which we were talking about earlier, right? When you talk about, sleep training or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Like whatever the thing is that you're doing in that moment is like, how does this impact the whole family, including us as parents, right? And not just baby. If I have to sacrifice my well-being for my baby, it's not going to go well in the end.
No, and even like for a larger scale picture, I recently, like very recently, had a conversation with my husband. And so my daughter is 5. So I struggled, that whole struggle was say 4 years ago. And he is now just like, we're just coming back around. So like, just to paint a picture of what a mom struggling so deeply can do to a family dynamic. My husband was talking about resentment that he has towards me because And because nobody else was asking him how he was doing, everybody was so focused on making me better, which was like obvious.
Yeah.
But also, my husband was working full time, picking the pieces up of his broken wife, managing the toddler, all of the things. And it broke him too. And we don't talk about those things, but this is the point that I'm trying to make, is because I broke, everything broke.
Yeah.
And it's taken us like 4 years to start like putting those bricks back together. So if there's a mom listening who thinks I could never do that, well, I really hope that you do that, because when you're not good, the whole family feels it. It's a whole ripple effect. Think of a sick day. What happens on the day you get like a stomach flu?
Right.
Just told you I was away for the weekend. You should see the shambles of my house.
Yes.
I mean, my kids were happy. They had a great time. You could tell by the looks of this playroom right now. But
Right.
what I mean by that is like the structure was gone. There's pieces missing because mom's not involved. And so, I don't want that to happen. It's so much bigger of a ripple effect than we realize.
Absolutely. And I think, by the way, these are my therapist parts that come out when I like kind of go deeper and ask these questions and stuff. But it's like things that obviously in my own personal experience happened and what I see with clients too, right? But that, I'm jumping a bit, but tell me kind of that coming out of it, right? And looking back and, okay, I'm feeling better. I'm doing better. I'm in therapy. Maybe I'm on meds. I'm getting treatment, et cetera, et cetera. For me, there was then dealing with the trauma of that experience. And I don't use the word trauma lightly. The reason why for me, I say that it was traumatic is because of the symptoms I had afterwards of if I had a bad day mentally, I would panic thinking that, oh my God, I'm back there again. I'm in the darkness. I'm in the worst place of my life again. I'm sick again. I'm not okay. I'm broken. And I would have trauma symptoms, panic. I had a pregnancy scare. I thought I was, and I say that because I had 3, we were done having kids. I didn't want any more kids. That's where we were. And after that experience of having extreme, like severe postpartum anxiety, thinking I was pregnant, I flipped out. I've never experienced fear like that in my life because I thought I'm going to have to be hospitalized. I will have to be hospitalized in order to have this baby. There's no way that I can do this without being hospitalized because I was so ill the last time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like kind of like also recovering from that experience, grieving the experience of missing chunks of time from my third baby's first year. There's chunks of time I don't remember. I don't remember my older 2 kids. So it's like in that time, it's like kind of coming to terms with that. How does that resonate for you? Did you have any kind of similar experience there or when you were feeling better?
So much. So irritability and anger is still my number one go-to emotion. I don't really feel sadness. I don't really feel anxious. Like I guess I do here and there, but generally when I'm overwhelmed, I'm angry.
Yeah, same.
So that's sucks because I feel like when I have bad days, like 'cause I'm a human, so I have bad days, all the time. I worry that I'm going backwards or I've totally screwed up my kids, that they need therapy now, or even going into the winter, I'm a little high stress right now going into the winter because I'm a little concerned about the darkness and is it going to overtake my mental health? And I do this every winter. And
Yep.
I mean, now I have a whole toolkit, but even with the toolkit, it's like, it's scary. But the grief part is huge for me. I've written about this so many times because I'm the same, like I'll look at, I actually have a hard time looking at pictures
Same.
from them. I have a really hard time looking at them. And I don't really know, even if they're happy moments, like I took my son to the Wiggles, in that time. And if I look at videos of the Wiggles, like obviously the Wiggles are super happy and it was whatever, but it like I can't even watch it without feeling this like uncomfortable like pit. Like I feel like 2019 really was like just like a write-off, and I wish I could just like erase it from my memory. I remember a lot of things, but it brings me like huge waves of grief, and huge waves of like just like I don't know, concern that like I've totally just like fucked my I'm so sorry. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah. Oh my God, you're totally allowed to swear.
Like I've totally like fucked Connor up because I was yelling and screaming and slamming doors and all of these things, when the reality is he probably doesn't remember that. But like also, you know, in my brain, I'm convinced that he is totally, completely ruined now because of me. But yeah, that grief piece is heavy. And my daughter and I have like a very bonded relationship, but it feels different than my relationship with my son, which is normal. Like we have normal, different relationships with each child, but I find myself reflecting on like, did I do that? Did I do that? And so that is something I still constantly work with. And I don't know that I ever will fully get rid of that feeling. Because I think there's like a lot of guilt when you struggle with your mental health. There's a lot of it. And you miss a lot of time with your kids and with your baby. And if you don't feel that love and bond right away, it's just, although it's normal because a lot of moms feel that, it's hard to say out loud. It's hard to work through it, even 5 years now. You know, it can feel very much like, oh, maybe she's that way because I didn't bond with her at like 3 months old, which I don't think that's the case, but like maybe it is. I don't know, but who knows?
Well, and talking about attachment, because I know that's a buzzword right now. And of course, when we talk about having, you know, a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder, attachment comes up, and how does that impact our kids and our attachment and all that stuff. However, attachment is not a one and done thing, right?
Mhm.
Attachment is something that we're constantly working on with whoever is in our lives, right? And that shifts and changes over time. And as our kids grow and get older, our dynamics are going to change with our kids, right? Like, obviously, my relationship with my teenager is different than when he was 5. You know, like we speak way more openly and we talk about bigger, more in-depth things than, of course, we did when he was 5. And that attachment piece and what he needs from me is totally different than what he needed at 5. And it's, again, it's not a one and done. Attachment can be repaired, attachment can grow and be, you know, solidified at any age and stage. And I always love to say this again. I know if you are someone who listens to the podcast regularly, I repeat myself, and I do this on purpose because it's important for people to know. Again, when you talked about you had your experience of postpartum rage and depression, anxiety with your second one, as I did with my third, that also the difference for me was that because again, we always hear in the news, right? Oh, if you have postpartum depression, you can't attach to your baby. You can't bond with your baby, right? Which is not true. I was obsessed with my baby because I was obsessed with nursing him. And so that was my focal point. That was my focus, was nursing him like a good mom should. But I will say I was detached from my older two.
Mhm.
They were just always in the way. Like I couldn't focus on nursing if they're running around. Like they were 4 and 3. Like they were supposed to be running around and in my face and all the
Of
things.
course.
Couldn't cope with them and I couldn't deal with them. So that also felt different. And I was like, why is that? I didn't get it. So if anyone's listening and you know, have more than one kid and you're struggling with your attachment or your relationship with the older one, that can happen.
So true. And yeah, it's an ongoing battle,
Yeah.
I feel like, right? Forever and ever and ever. And
Yeah.
when it's not this thing, it'll be the next one. And then after that one, and then after that one, and so on and so forth. And I think just now for me, I'm so grateful for the experience because I've learned so much about myself. I have learned like how to give myself grace and self-compassion, and I have a huge amount of tools in my toolkit now. And I have a therapist that I've seen for 4 years straight who I love and adore, and she's amazing, and she's been such a vital support to my overall well-being. And yeah, now I just say all my scary thoughts so that other moms either don't have to because they're scared to, but they can know that they're not alone, because you're not. And there will be one after you and one after them and 5 more after that. And that was a very eye-opening experience this weekend too. Just even the amount of pregnant women that were like, this is really hard and I'm really anxious and these are the things I'm concerned about. And, we need a space for moms to know that they're not alone. And I hope to be a part of it.
Of course, you are a part of it. I mean, your podcast is great. You wrote a book about it. I do want to ask you about that. I do have a question. It's going back a little bit, but in terms of trusting yourself as a mom, as a parent, even though, of course, like parenting is really hard. And, I always talk about before Liam, before my third kid, it's not that I thought I was the perfect mom. I definitely did not. But I always had this trust in myself that I was like the best mom for my boys. Like, I'm their mom. I'm the best mom I can be for them. And I'm cool with that. But having that experience of postpartum anxiety and depression really made me doubt that. Was there a shift there for you in your trust in yourself as a parent?
Yes, I went from like after Connor feeling confident, feeling like, I'll do what's best for me and my family. When Scarlett came, that all went to hell. It all went to hell. And then I threw a match on it and gasoline and it went up in flames and I had to start over. And I've had to start over a couple times since then. There's days for sure when I doubt myself, when, you get an email from the teacher or you forget something. And you're like, frick, like, I really thought I was doing a good job. Well, you are doing a good job. Sometimes we just like screw up. And that's kind of where I kind of now I'm like, I know I'm a good mom. I'm a great mom. And I think that is something that I've worked really hard to get here. But that is something that I'm confident. Like, I know what's best for my kids. I know what's best for myself. The hard part is actually like putting forward the work of what actually is good for us, what's good for them, saying no to things, putting those boundaries in place. But I mean, over time, it's gotten easier, but I know confidently now, yes, I am a good mom and I trust myself. But when I did have Scarlett and struggled with my mental health, it all went away, all of it. So, I think that's also a normal piece and maybe a part of the mental illness process. But if you can work really hard at establishing that foundation with yourself, knowing in my gut, we've been through many hard times since I've had Scarlett. And that's always now been at the forefront of my mind. Like, I'm a good mom. I know I'm making good decisions. I know that I can trust myself in what I'm doing. And on the days where I don't feel it as much, sometimes I just remind myself, like, it's okay that you're feeling this way, but you're still a good mom. Yeah. You know your shit. You know what's best for your kids. But like, today's just really hard. I sit with my feelings a lot more than allowing them to just take over and, take over the entire situation. They sit and visit.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I love that. And you're also not maybe out loud or whatever that looks like for you, but you're also modeling that for your kids, right?
I'm trying to. That's what I'm working on.
Right. We're all trying to. Right. And I think that because that was really hard too, is accepting, like, because for me, the narrative was like, I'm broken. And I feel so similar to you of like, actually that experience was helpful in a lot of ways. It's like, I got to a point where I couldn't cope anymore. I broke and then put myself back together. But also that means I'm hyper aware of my symptoms, of, what I need, how I need to pull back when I'm pushing too hard, all those things, which is actually really helpful for me.
For me too. My self-awareness has grown so much, and I joke all the time, like, generally now the only person who gets the wrath of me is my poor husband.
I know.
But now my self-awareness is so high that I compare it to like a car crash. You know, when you're like watching, you're like, oh, this is gonna be bad. I see it happening. I hear the words coming out of my mouth, but it still happens. And then I have to come back with my tail between my legs. I'm like, I'm really sorry that I acted like that. And he's like,
Yeah. Same. It's so true. I do definitely like that's something too that I feel like I do a lot better is apologize. Like, not
Yes,
that I
me too.
wasn't, of course I would apologize before, but I would say not as often because it was like admitting defeat. But now it's like, no, I was a dick. Like, I'm so sorry, like recognize
Yes.
that,
And it's also okay to say that you're a dick because we all can be one sometimes. Like,
right.
I mean, I can be one several times a day.
Oh,
So
totally. How long, like, what can you tell us what your recovery was like after Scarlett? I know you got to a therapist, you got your diagnosis. So then what was that recovery period like for you?
So I went to therapy every other week for an entire year. And then I've honestly been in therapy since. So I saw a different therapist for that particular time in my life because she was more like specialized like you, where she kind of knew where I was coming from. Now the therapist that I see is just a generalized therapist where I talk about all sorts of things, but that's also been extremely helpful to understand myself, how I struggle with perfectionism and the ADHD piece. And it's all kind of helped me piece together a lot of my life, including, why I plummeted so badly postpartum and even with Connor, because, I was struggling with perfectionism and struggling with all these things that I've always struggled with. But motherhood seems to add this kind of final layer to it, or it feels heavier or something. So I did it for a full year. I committed myself to working with that therapist for the entire year until I went back to work. And then when I went back to work, I transferred to this other therapist and I've worked with her ever since. So yeah, I don't see myself ever leaving her. I told her we're probably in this for life until one of us is no longer here.
I hear that.
Or she retires, maybe. Could happen too. I probably could allow her to retire. I see her so often. So
Right. Yeah. You're part of the retirement plan. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I love that. And so how long do you feel it took you to kind of come back to, I mean, a newer version of Amanda, but feeling like yourself again and like feeling like, okay, my feet are on the ground here and I can kind of cope and do this. How long did that take?
I remember it starting about 6 months after I started seeing her. I started to feel pieces of me like come back. But then probably around the year mark is when I really started to feel like I could trust myself again. And then around the year mark too is when I started writing blogs and I started the podcast and so that also was a huge healing piece and still continues to be, because when I don't know, I'll have like a bad day with my kids and I'll just write myself like notes or how I'm feeling or whatever. And then I'll turn it into a post on Instagram. And then just like hearing from other moms, like, oh my God, this is what I struggle with too. Like that also is healing to me, that I'm not alone.
Yes.
And all these people struggle with the same things and all of that. So yeah, that was a huge kind of, I think, piece to the catalyst of like really where I healed, when I started to just speak my truth and say what's really going on inside this brain here, and to realize that a lot of moms struggle with the same thing. So either we are all crazy together, or we all just feel the same and we don't have a place to put it out there. So yeah, I would say a year for sure, and then maybe even the few months after.
And so around the year mark, usually birthdays can be like a time of reflection. And especially I find with babies, like when our baby's a year, we tend to reflect on like, holy shit, we made it, right? Like, maybe just barely, but okay, we made it. And sometimes for some people, not everyone, but for some people, it's maybe like reflecting on the birth or how they came into the world and, that kind of that newborn stage and you're like, oh my God, thank God we're not in that anymore. Did any of that happen for you around Scarlett's first birthday, reflecting on the year and how it went and the good and the not so good?
Yeah, I found her first birthday to be very emotional, very like,
Yeah.
I made it. I'm so proud of myself, but then, I grieved a lot. And yeah, her first birthday was hard, but also very reflective. So because I was in therapy and was in such a better headspace, I was able to kind of stay in the reflective piece. I wrote a lot about grieving over that year. And it was a great time to like see my therapist and talk through that with her. But also I remember this like really nice feeling of like just being so present with her and then also focusing on like, well, I'm here now.
Yes.
Right? Like I wasn't then, but I'm here where I need to be now. So just being reflective of that and then like more like looking out to the future. Like I will stay here and this is where I promise I'm going to stay, to myself, to her, to all the things. And that was where I focused most of my energy. But the grief was big.
Yeah. Oh.
And I think that's normal.
Totally.
Even like, your baby turns 1, you're going back to work, you're doing all the things. Like 1 is a very emotional, grieving time for whatever reason. Yeah, you know what? Every year actually has been. I find like you can reflect and it kind of makes you like grieve a little bit because you're like, oh, wish we could go back. Like that was a great year. Or, I wish they were little again and I miss those times and I miss all of that. But yeah, I think I felt all of the above.
Right. And so what have you always been, a writer or inclined to writing? What kind of pushed you in that direction? What was that like?
I always loved writing and I've always been really good at writing, but I was told writing wouldn't make me money. So, I kind of let that go. So I went into pharmacy. I took a left. I work in pharmacy. But when I was struggling, I was doing a lot of journaling and a lot of that type of stuff. And I wanted to start a blog because I had so many like blogs on my phone.
Right.
But then, my anxiety kicked in and was like, oh, well, what if your grammar is wrong? What if you spell something wrong? And,
right.
As if someone's going to read my blog to figure out if I can spell.
Right.
But, so that's how I started the podcast because I definitely know how to talk.
Right.
Yes. So I do still write, and I have, my book and I do write a ton. But the podcast is really where I could get my feelings right out there.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so tell us about the book. Tell us like the title, obviously, so people can find it and, how that came to be. Because a blog is great and a book feels like a big endeavor. Was it?
It was humongous.
Okay.
So I met someone named Courtney St. Croix, who is the publisher. It's called Lead Her Publishing.
Okay.
And so I met her because she was looking for writers to write in a book called Momming Hard.
Okay. So
that was the first time I put all of my experience with Scarlett on paper in like one form. And so it was published in the book called Momming Hard. So that was kind of like lit my fire to continue to start writing again. And then Courtney and I became friends and we were chit-chatting one day about the podcast and she was a guest on the podcast and she just said, Honest as a Mother really needs to be a book. It should really be a co-author project of its own. And so, because at the time, kind of where I was focusing was I wanted moms to come on, share their stories, share their hard thing, because as I dove into this topic, I realized, moms want to hear from other moms who've had a miscarriage. I've never had a miscarriage, so I can't speak on this topic. So I would, bring on a mom who's went through that and we would talk about it together or just like shoot the shit about like what motherhood is actually like. And people seem to really enjoy that. So she said, what if we did a co-author book, like an anthology where different women could write about their hard thing in motherhood. So that's what we did. So the book is called Honest as a Mother. There's book 1 and book 2 just came out last week.
Nice. That's so exciting.
So they're full. They're like, you've got everything from, like, I wrote about my mental health experiences. There's more mental health. There's parenting in the pandemic. There's a lot of that. There's IVF and eating disorders and suicidal ideation and miscarriage and domestic abuse. Like, there's so much. I could not believe the amount of like heartache that lives inside some of these women. But it was, there was one that was diagnosed with a brain tumor while she was pregnant and had surgery and had to rely on people when you're feeling like, I'm a mom, I should be able to do it all. But she obviously couldn't, but was still struggling with the whole, I should be able to do it all. And so they've done really well. And they're probably the most vulnerable things I've ever read in my entire life. But we're just trying to normalize all things motherhood.
Right. Amazing. Yeah, I will. And I will link all of this, everything you mentioned in the show notes, of course, the books and the podcast and everything.
And I'll send you, I have 2 books for you specifically. So if you think that they'd be like a good fit for your clients, please like share it. But I really think that like somebody like you is who I wanted in the hands of. Like, I want the professionals to tell me, is this going to be supportive to the moms, which I think it is. But yeah, I just want moms to know that they're not alone.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And that's what I find in this work in the perinatal period, but as a parent myself and having my own struggles, of course, as we all do, but that like peer support piece, like that me too, that like you're not alone piece has been so critical, more so than any other population that I've ever worked with, right? Of that real level piece of like, I struggle too, and hearing, and even for me, like my son's 11 and, there's some stories and clients that just hit me in a way. And I'm like, oh God, it just brings me right back there, and of course I do my own work and, take care of myself on outside a session. But even for me, it's been healing too, of like hearing other people's stories that are so similar to mine, even sometimes word for word things they say. And I'm like, oh my God, I said the exact same thing. Like I had the exact same thoughts. It's so wild.
I know, but it's refreshing.
Yeah,
because you're like, it's just another validation that you're not a failure. You're not alone. Like nothing like motherhood has ever come onto my plate that makes me wonder if I'm doing the right thing on such a regular basis, or makes me question who I am as a person. Or, I've never had to reflect so hardly on myself until I became a mom. And I think we all need it. Like, I mean, I love that you said that, because you are a mental health professional. So it's so refreshing when you hear even the mental health professionals don't know what they're doing, right? I remember my pediatrician said that to me once. Like, he reminded me that, like, I forget what we were talking about, but he just said to me, Amanda, listen, I have the shiny diplomas on the wall. You know what you're talking about, not me. You are mom. Whatever you say, I'm going to trust you over the textbook.
Right. I love that. That is so supportive.
And I remember that moment and I was like, well, he's right. But like, we tout that so much. So it's really refreshing to hear that. So thank you for saying what you said.
No problem. Anytime. Because it's the truth, right? And I tell clients too all the time, I'm like, basically, I'm not here to cheerlead. Like, I'm not lying. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, right? Like, it is true. And I say, there's people that have asked, right? Oh, isn't motherhood like the best thing you've ever done? I'm like, no. Like, traveling Europe is
absolutely
way
not
better. Like, what? But what I say about motherhood, for me, it is the absolute hardest thing that I have ever done, that I probably will ever do in my lifetime, exactly for all those reasons you said, right? It's so, so, so hard. And I think that also speaks to why it's like we could be going along, for example, I have ADHD. I wasn't diagnosed till 2 years ago. I knew it when my kid was diagnosed, but pre-pregnancy, pre-kids, no idea I had anxiety, just thought I was like, I don't know, not handling shit, which I wasn't. But then motherhood comes along, parenthood comes along, and then all of a sudden it's like crash, like, because it's too much. It's like using all of our resources that all of a sudden the things we did before to cope are just not going to do it because we have way more on our plate now.
Right? Oh, yeah.
So, Amanda, any final thoughts that you want to share with listeners about your story and, kind of where you've come from and what you're doing, how you're coping?
I think just I want to give the reminder that you're not alone and it's okay to not be okay and it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah.
So don't hesitate to reach out for help, whether that is a podcast like this one, a therapist, your doctor, your mom, whoever it is.
Yeah.
Do not be afraid to ask for help because you're not failing. And even if you feel like you are, I promise that you're not. And you're a good mom. That's my other big takeaway is always, you're a good mom. End of story.
Thank you. Yeah. So where can people reach you? What's the best place to reach you at?
I like to hang out on Instagram. So if you want to follow me, my handle is at Amanda Gurman, Gurman.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda, for being vulnerable and sharing your story and your truth and, being such a supportive part of this community. And I encourage everyone to go listen to your podcast, Honest as a Mother, get the books, check out your blog, your writings, all of that amazing stuff. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share this podcast with any of your friends or family members who may benefit from it. If you feel you are experiencing any of the symptoms or issues that we discussed today, please reach out to any one of your supports or go to perinatalwellbeing.ca for more information, blog posts, podcast episodes, and ways to connect with us. Check out our new episode every other Monday.